Okay.
At the end, yeah.
Let's give you a microphone. I keep calling the room the Philadelphia room. I don't know why, guys. My brain is so done. All right, good morning. Thank you all for being here so early in the morning. Still sleeping. Yeah. I wish. As are we. Okay, so I've already started recording it, so you're good. The session this morning is going to be on managing unmanaged collections. And I'll be using some case studies that I was or am involved in to talk about this. You are too. Okay, so starting off with a little bit of kind of what is a managed collection and why do so many collections go unmanaged? Because I can pretty confidently say that like most museums or archives have something or some section of their collection, if not all of their collection, that is unmanaged. So a lot of times if you have kind of an older institution that has a long history of collecting, maybe before current professional standards were in place, or maybe they've started cataloging, but they have a backlog of older things from years of donations. A lot of times you will see like historical societies that have been around for decades and they have a huge collection, but it's not cataloged or recorded down in some sort of organized way. Another thing that often happens, especially with smaller museums, is that there's no professionally trained staff. A lot of our smaller museums live on volunteers that are fantastic and dedicated, but might not have the training or the understanding of how to catalog or manage a collection with those standard best practices. And then, of course, things that we all deal with, lack of resources, time, and money. You all know how much time it takes to actually catalog and manage a collection. And if you don't have the staff to do that, or the time to do that, or the money for a cataloging system, that can seem like a pretty daunting challenge. Like I was talking to Ed from the Tuba Museum, because he's the other medical museum in the state like mine. And he's doing the same thing. He's got almost 3,000 objects that he is himself cataloging one by one. And so that takes a long time. And then of course, the size of the collection. The task can be really, really daunting. And a lot of times it's really hard to know where to start, where to dive into that collection. I'm going to talk about my collection at the Neal Museum for the most of this, but prior to my current position, I was working with two other museums. One was another university museum that had a storage room, a little bit probably bigger than this, plus their museum galleries, plus another storage room that was at least probably another size like this. None of it was cataloged, no inventory, things everywhere, piles. And so they didn't have a staff. The head of the library was trying to work on that museum while also being the head of the library. And you look at that and you're like, how do you even start on this? So it is very easy for a collection to go unmanaged. So if this sounds like your collection, do not be ashamed, because like I said, pretty much every museum or collection has something, if not all, that are unmanaged. So today, I'm going to talk about specifically the collection that I manage, and that's at the William A. Neal Museum of the Health Sciences at West Virginia University. So just a little background on this museum. This is a rather small museum that is located within the Health Sciences Center at WVU, which is kind of the educational building for all of the health sciences programs for the med school, School of Dentistry, School of Public Health, School of Nursing, School of Dentistry. All of them are kind of in that building. This was the brainchild of the gentleman that you see here, which is Dr. Neal. He was a very prominent pediatric cardiologist in the state, very well loved. When he retired, he started getting into the history of medicine in West Virginia. He wrote a book on Dr. Van Leer, who was a very prominent person in the history of WVU medicine. And so he wanted to put together this museum to really highlight the history of medicine in the state. And so there was a small team, including Elizabeth here, who was the GA, who did a lot of this work that put this together. So it started prior to 2020. They were putting together all of the background themes, all those things. Technically, this was supposed to open in fall of 2020. Y'all know what happened in 2020. So it did get delayed a bunch. It was officially dedicated in fall of 2022. It did not have an actual staff person until I was hired in the summer of 2023. So when I came on board, the museum was there, right? All the exhibits were there. I had a collection in storage, but nothing else had really been done. There was no foundational documents done. There was no cataloging done, all the things. And that was just partially because of A, the pandemic, B, not having a dedicated staff person, and C, all three members of the main leadership team had left in some way or another. Elizabeth graduated and went to Arthurdale. Dr. Neal unfortunately passed away early in 2021. And then John Cuthbert, who was the director of the Regional History Center, he eventually retired as well before I came on. So that left me with a collection that didn't have much in the way of documentation and things like that. So if you are faced with a collection like mine, we're going to go through some of the steps that I've taken that you can take to start chipping away at that organization. I will say that I was in some ways very lucky because my collection is rather small compared to a lot of others. We are close to being done cataloging, and I think we're under 800 catalog entries as of right now. So it's very small compared to other institutions that have thousands and thousands and thousands of objects. So that is one pro to make it a little bit easier for me. And I also do have some court systems that I'll talk about here in a second. But if you're facing an unmanaged collection, one of the first things that I would say to do is find out what you have or do not have in terms of documentation. So do you have anywhere any sort of list or previous catalog records of objects? This sometimes will be there, but not in the place that you think it's going to be. So for example, when I was working with the Waynesburg University Museum, which is the one that had like all the big storage, they had never had a museum person as a curator. So there were no records. But we did find when we were working through their gemstone records, or they have a huge gem and mineral and geological collection. We were cleaning out a closet and we found binders that were a printed out version of catalog records for at least a huge chunk of those, and the pieces were still numbered. So it was like, right, we have at least something for this collection that can tell us information. It was buried in a closet that we had to uncover. Somewhere in those storage rooms, I'm told that there are also index cards. Had not found those yet by the time we had left. So, you know, what do you have, or what are you missing? Do you have any documentation of donations or donors? When these objects came in, who donated them, even if you just have a name? What do you have? What do you not have? Deeds of gift. Now, I will say that for especially a lot of smaller or older organizations, it's very likely that you will not have a deed of gift for a lot of your objects. But find out if you do. Find out if you have any sort of written correspondence, anything that would go along with one of these donations. And then condition records. Again, probably a lot of collections will not have these for older objects, but see if you have them, right? Just find out whatever documentation you have and note what you don't have for all of your collections. Oh, come on in, come on in. Oh, you lost your phone. So I was very, and I know you can't necessarily see this text. You know this spreadsheet, don't you, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I do.
So this, again, I was very fortunate in the sense that the Neal Museum, this is the one that Elizabeth, yes. So I was very fortunate in the sense that the Neal Museum, weirdly enough, is under WVU Libraries. It's a very strange thing, I know, but that's just how it worked out. But that meant that the staff of the West Virginia and Regional History Center was involved in parts of pulling this collection together, partially because the director of the center was one of that small team that was putting the museum together. So I did have a spreadsheet. It was a rather limited spreadsheet. So for example, we would have collections that would be like slides, and then I open the box and it's like 150 slides. Or, you know, things like that. They're very limited descriptions, but it would tell me at least a little bit about donated it, what backlog number it was, what's supposed to be there. Another fun one is this top one was, I think, 9 different donations that they had just lumped together in one number, which I didn't realize at first, and then had to split them all out as separate catalogs. But I did at least have a starting point. A lot of museums will not even have this. So I was very, very lucky that I had this. But of course, when I was moving forward, I had to go through and actually, okay, what matches this spreadsheet? What is actually in that collection? You know, splitting that huge bulk one into separate collections for numbers, figuring out what was missing, because there were a couple of things that were on the spreadsheet, but I did not physically have, and kind of going from there. You can kind of see my handwritten notes too, where I then went through and had to assign each collection an actual catalog number, which I'll talk about in a second. But this is where I started. And like I said, not everyone's going to have this. But if you even just start going through your collection and making an inventory on a spreadsheet, you're already going to be on the right path just to know what you have. So step 2, organize, to divide and conquer. Like I said, collections that are unmanaged can be super daunting, especially if they are large collections. There is no way mentally to just dive into a collection like that and not feel way overwhelmed and like you're out of your element. So don't be overwhelmed, divide and conquer, right? Chunk that down into smaller sections, smaller collections, whatever you've got to do to move kind of methodically through. So the way that I did this with the Neal Museum is I kind of broke it up into different locations. And as I was going, I assigned a number, a catalog number, to each of these collections. Some of them had backlog numbers that were from the Regional History Center. Those are in their system. And so I then assigned a new number that would be for our system, so that I could then identify. And what I literally did on the spreadsheet, before I even was touching my objects, I just went and started assigning numbers so that when I went into my collection, I could just match those numbers up. So in terms of location, I took a floor plan, a rough floor plan of our museum, and I assigned the cases a name, in this case, a letter. This is not something that was done before me. This is something I did. So I just went, you know, A through M, assigning a letter to the cases so that I now can put a location down, and this is a standard location. And so my last spring, I was fortunate enough to have my graduate assistant, and I had an extra intern, and we essentially just went case by case. Okay, case A is done, check, right? Case B is done, check, and just went through doing everything in case A, everything in case B, and down the line. I did the same thing for our storage. I have a small section of storage in the Regional History Center's stacks that I can keep my other collections. And so basically I assigned a name for each shelf. And so I knew, okay, shelf 1 is done, check that off the list. And I broke it down by those locations. That way I could keep track of where we were in getting things done, and I could kind of chunk it down into those small sections. And again, this wasn't done before. I assigned this location map, and you just sign it, keep it, and kind of do it methodically, be consistent. Creating a number system. So some of you might know this, some of you might not. In the museum world, your typical numbering system is going to be the year of accession, so the year you got that collection in, the collection number, and then the object number. So for example, a collection from this year, 2025, if it's the first collection you bring in a year, it's 1. If it's the second collection, it's 2, and so on. And then each number will have their individual number within that collection. So that is the typical numbering system that we use in the museum world. What do you do when you are dealing with an unmanaged collection where you don't know when things came in or what order the collections came in or any of that information? Create a system that makes sense and then keep it consistent. So I, again, was a little bit lucky in this case because it's a newer museum. It's only a couple years old. And I had at least the years that things came in. And so what I did is I took everything on that spreadsheet that came in 2019, and that was going to be 2019.1, 2019.2. It didn't matter to me what order those collections were in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as long as they were assigned a number. Same thing with 2020, and then each one got assigned a number. Now, things that have come in since I was the curator, those have been put in the order that they come in because you accession them as they come in. But for the stuff in the backlog, I just gave them, I knew what year they came in and then just organized it from there. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that I think I know the answer to, but there are collections like in at our Dale that I have no idea when they came in.
Yes.
Like, there's no way that we'll ever know. We take the way I handle it is, I am like, okay, well, I'm just gonna give this like 2025.3.
Yeah.
And pretend that it's coming this year and make a note that it was like found within the collection. Is that typical? Is that what you recommend?
So there's a couple ways that you can do it. And again, do what makes sense for you. So there's a couple of pieces that were found in our collection that we just cataloged. And I did 2025.1, 2025.2 for those. For the pharmacy museum that's also at WVU, they have a massive collection that's completely uncatalogued. And so I was helping them get started. And they're the same way. That museum's been there since the 1960s. They have no idea when these things came in. So what we did in that case was they have like pharmacy cases. And so I was like, all right, let's do everything in this section is going to be 1960. Everything in this section is going to be 1961. Whatever system was going to work, because I knew that if we did like 1 year for that, it was going to be like 2,000 collections within that. So we just by system broke it up. And then if anything comes in, they'll start from, right? So that's what I mean by, if you have the dates, use them. But if you are looking at a backlog and you literally have no idea when things came in, make a system that is going to work so that it's consistent. And then you're able to just match the number to the object. And you can make a note in your system that you did your numbering that way, that these are not the actual years that those pieces came in, but this is to organize it in some way. So that's, I think we hadn't gotten very far with Waynesburg in terms of the collection. But in that case, maybe like the gem collection is going to be 1 year, right? And then the pottery collection is going to be 1 year. Whatever makes sense for your institution or for the people who are doing the cataloging, just be consistent. That's the biggest thing. So this is our little storage area. And so when I was going through with that spreadsheet and I was kind of assigning catalog numbers for everything and making sure we had everything on that spreadsheet, I basically went through to the boxes and I put good old sticky notes with the new catalog number on the boxes and organized them so that each box had the new catalog number on it. And you can also maybe see that I have pink and yellow sticky notes on here. This was just for my brain, where if it was a yellow sticky note, that object was not in the box. So it was on exhibit, and we'd already cataloged it on exhibit. If it's a pink sticky note, that means that it's something, an object that needs to be cataloged. That way, when we went and got into our storage to start doing the cataloging, we could kind of quickly reference what we actually had to pull, what objects were there or not. But this was basically going through before we even cataloged any of these objects and just organizing it, giving it all the numbers so that I could go into the spreadsheet and be like, okay, this object is this number if I needed to find something before we cataloged it. Okay, so next step, cataloging. And this is probably going to be one of the longest steps of this process because cataloging takes time. It's great if you have a staff to do it. If you're a staff of one, it's gonna take time, but don't get discouraged. Just keep plugging along on it because it's very, very important to do this. So there's really two main steps for the cataloging process. One is going to be the cataloging information. This is largely going to be kind of your identification of the object. And the other one is going to be the condition report. So these two steps are really important to do. If you are bringing a collection in, do both of these when the collection comes in. But obviously, if you're doing your backlog, if you're kind of doing an unmanaged collection, still make sure that you're doing both of these. So cataloging. And yes, that was a shot I did for Museum Week. It was very random, but I needed a good picture for this. Cataloging the information, the identification information that you need. These records provide your basic information, date, provenance, measurements, materials, things like that, and any donor information that you know. And I have but I brought with me some samples of our cataloging and condition reports. So you're welcome to take one of these if you'd like. But this is going to be kind of like your basic information that goes along with that catalog number. Take pictures of your objects from all angles with your object number. So in a perfect world, best practices, you would label your object with the number. And if you've been in museums, you sometimes can see that there's an object label either on a tag or on the object written. It's really important, but it can be tricky, especially if you're trying to use like the special paint that you can write on with the label numbers. I've tried to do that on some things and it has totally gone wrong. So I have not done that yet for our collection, and I've not yet tagged it. But with my pictures, I always have the catalog number in the picture with the object. So at very basic, I can still identify which object goes with that number. And in some cases where I've had like multiples of the same thing, I will sometimes keep a sticky note on them for now until I can get them housed in proper labeled archival materials. So even if you don't go so far as to do like the fancy writing things on your objects, at least have photographs with the object number in there so that you can still identify what object goes with that number. And you want to take pictures of your object at all angles. And that'll make sense, of course, for the condition report as well. So the condition report, this is something that I feel like people get the cataloging stuff down, but don't always get the condition stuff down. It's equally important, though, in this process. While you're doing your cataloging, you want to carefully inspect your object and note any details about condition reports. Even if that is, this is in perfect condition, awesome. Be as detailed as you can. If there are damaged pieces or condition issues that you note where they are on the object. And again, this is why you take pictures from all angles so that you can see the condition of the object. And if there's any like major specific condition notes that you kind of take pictures of those condition things as well. So this is important. If you're bringing an object into your collection, you want to know what the condition of the object is as you bring it in. But over time, this is really important to identify any objects in your collection, either new or old, that may be unstable, that might need to be taken care of in a certain way or need conservation. These reports also are going to track the condition over time. So again, in a best world scenario, if you have all these things done and lots of staff, you're supposed to take an inventory of your collection every Elizabeth just starts. You're supposed to take an inventory every couple of years and do a condition report. That way you can see if there is an object that's deteriorating, or if there's damage to an object that like came off of exhibit, or like if you loaned an object out and it came back with a damaged issue. So this kind of allows you over time to see if there's any growing issues in your collection. For me, this has been very helpful going through the collection to know my objects, but also to identify objects that have been put on exhibit that maybe should not have been put on exhibit, that I will need to pull. So one example is the book that you see here. This is the spine is falling apart. And this is on exhibit laid flat. It's not even in a cradle. So I would like to pull this object if I can in the near future, but I've marked that, I've taken pictures, and that's all in our cataloging system. So next step, build your collection records. Decide on a cataloging system or a software. There are some out there that are super expensive. There are some out there that are a little bit better. I know cost is always an issue when you have a museum. Decide on whatever cataloging system works for you. We use Catalogit at the Neal Museum. It's a little bit more affordable and it's web-based, so that you can, like, I can be on my computer in my office on one campus and then take my computer to the other campus and work in my collection storage. And I can also do it on my phone. Super helpful. But decide on a system that's going to work for you, even if it is literally making a spreadsheet or a Word document to start for each of your objects. Sometimes that's what you can do, but decide on a system and keep it consistent. Build your physical records. So you need to have all those things in one place, and I'll show you that on the next slide, and then get any donor documentation that you can. Now, if you're working with an older collection, it is likely that you will not be able to get donor information. I was kind of lucky in this sense that all of my donations have come in from 2019 to now, and I was able to reach out and try to reach out to those who had donated to get deeds of gift and things like that, which is its own process. So for your physical records, ideally, you would have a folder for each of your collections. And in that folder would be your catalog sheet / record for each of your objects in that collection, your condition record for those objects, any deeds of gifts or donor information, and that can include any correspondence that you've had back and forth with your donors, or research on that object or collection. Everything in the collection or about the collection should be in one place. This is going to be super helpful for you down the line. So this is one of the things that I've had to do with the Neal collection. That is literally a photo of one of my file drawers. Each one of those has the number of the collection, and I've been working on building the physical records for each of those collections. Sometimes you won't have them, but do your best.
Do you print off like the catalog entry, place it in the folder as like a backup?
Not yet,
Okay.
but I do.
I also do them because it's
so
much paper.
This, I have these.
Okay.
So we've been cataloging on this first and then inputting it into Catalogit. So we do have these in there. And then one of the things that I'd like to do when we're kind of done is then also save all the pictures in a separate place from Catalogit too, just in case. I just haven't gotten there yet.
I've got my Catalogit,
Yeah.
and an external hard drive.
Yes.
And there probably should be a second external hard
So,
drive.
and that goes to the last point. Keep digital and physical copies of all your records and have as many backups as you can. So for example, everything in these file folders is also scanned into Catalog It. And eventually, when I have the time, I'm going to take everything and also put it at least in like a Google Drive that would be accessible, or an external hard drive, or whatever it is. You need to have multiple copies, and you should have digital and physical copies, because if you have a fire or a flood and your physical copies go away, you still have your digital copies. If your digital system goes down, you at least have your physical copies to back up. So always keep multiple copies of all of this stuff, so that in the future, all of this work that you've done to manage your collection does not go away. So that's like a big rule of thumb. So those are kind of the main key steps in kind of going through and chunking through a collection. But a couple other points here, what to do about loans. Lots of collections will have loans, or quote unquote loans in their collection. What the heck do you do about that if you're trying to manage a collection that you already have? So one rule of thumb that a lot of museums, especially small museums, don't have a lot of capacity, don't take permanent loans. Steer towards temporary loans if you need them for like a specific program or a specific exhibit, but steer clear of permanent loans. Part of the reason for that is the legality of ownership. You know, if you take a permanent loan from a donor and it's been there for 20 years, that donor might come back and either want it, or if there's like a condition issue with that object, do you have the legal ownership to do the conservation work on that object? If that object gets damaged in a flood, what's the repercussion for that relationship? So it's much better for an institution if you say, we will not take a permanent loan, we will only take an actual donation to the collection. And then, you know, there might be some temporary loans or, you know, pieces that you might want for an exhibit. That's a whole nother thing. It is. So it's I have this object. Yeah, I have an object that I really want to be in the museum, but I don't want to let go of it yet. So I'm going to give it to you on permanent loan, but technically the donor still has legal ownership of it. We have to take care of it. Yeah, that's why we say don't do it anymore. Yeah, and I can tell you some interesting stories about that during question and answer if you want to. But steer clear of permanent loans moving forward, at least as much as you can. And then if you have some of these awkward loans that you know the people are still around, maybe try to reach out to them and say, hey, we're steering away from a permanent loan. Would you like to either take your object back or permanently donate it to the collection and have that paper trail documented? Have a loan policy and agreement paperwork. If your museum does not already have this, make it as one of your foundational documents. That way, if someone gets weird about it, you're like, here's the policy. And then document everything. If you are going to take something on a temporary loan, you document everything about that agreement. You document the condition of the object when it's leaving you or coming in, depending on which way it's going. Have that paper trail to document everything. This is something that I've had to do with the Neal Museum. We of course have some objects that we're having trouble getting deeds of gift from. We also have like some of the medical schools loaned us stuff. We don't have any agreement, any paperwork to like document that, and they won't answer my emails. So like those is a constant struggle, but this is, you know, a couple of points that you can think about if you're dealing with tricky loans. Oh, how would you handle a permanent loan already existing in an unmanaged collection, especially if the donor has passed? That is a very good question, and I have at least 2 objects where that exact thing has happened. So the way that I managed kind of all of that was I had at least rough information on who the donor was. So to the best of my ability, I found their addresses And I was also kind of lucky because some of that was with our development officer in libraries. And so I could get some of that information from her, which will not always be the case. But I sent out letters to every donor asking for the deed of gift. Some I got back, some I didn't. In the case of someone who has passed, I've tried to contact the next of kin. I identified the person's son, I believe, and tried to send them a letter. I have not received a reply, but in that folder, I have all of copies of all the letters that I've sent to the family trying to communicate about a deed of gift. And then, so I have some sort of paper trail. The other interesting thing about this point, whether it's things that have been quote unquote loaned or donated and has been in your collection for a really long time, or the person has passed, some states have part of their property law is an abandoned property law where museums after so many years can just take legal ownership of that object. West Virginia does not have that law in place yet. This is something that we are going to try to get on the books. We were going to try to do it this year, but we just didn't have the capacity to do it. So that's something that hopefully if that's in place, and different states will have those on the books. So you can always check in your location. But that's another solution. Yeah.
So that'd be something right.
Possibly. So the thing is, there's no legal marker for that. So technically we have to wait for a legal marker. But like in our current collections policy, like I very specifically say in there, like if you drop something off, I'm not gonna just take it. And kind of have it in there saying like, don't just give me stuff. It doesn't always have to, because you're not gonna have the capacity to do that for every collection. That that would probably only happen if family came to take something, and that would be a pretty rare occurrence for most of these collections. But this is one of the reasons why we are trying to put that statute into our property law here in West Virginia to just make that question not even a thing. So that's something that we are working on. But it is tricky. It is tricky, especially if the person has passed. A couple other things here to make your life a lot easier as you move forward in your collection. Do not bring a new collection in without doing the process, right? I think it's the tendency for some people to be like, but I have this huge backlog. I need to kind of like get through that before I catalog anything new. No, if you are bringing things in, do the cataloging when you bring it in and for everything moving forward, and then go back and work on your backlog. That way, you know that under your watch, everything is being done correctly. If you are working with a team, if you have volunteers or interns or grad students or who else working on the cataloging, make sure you have a standard procedure and a standard set of instructions so that everyone is doing the same thing. And that way it's going to be consistent down the line and you're not going to have these issues of things being wonky. Get the deed of gift. If you bring in anything into your collection, get the deed of gift. And if you need to know more about deeds of gift, feel free to ask me after. But this paper is the legal ownership switching from the donor to you, which means you now have that in your collection legally, and you can either keep it, get rid of it, take care of it in whatever way you need to legally. So get the deed of gift. Do not bring anything in without a deed of gift. Have a collections policy in place. If you do not have a written policy for your collection, write one. These are super important because they're going to, in part, list out what you will and will not take. So that way you're not being inundated with stuff that you can't use. And then you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? So for example, the collections policy that we are working on, we define the scope of objects that fit the Neal Museum. So we take in objects that are related to medical history in West Virginia, in some cases, medical history more broadly, if it's particularly significant, things that are kind of attached to significant people in medical history in West Virginia, or things that are connected to WVU medicine. So for example, when I had someone email me and say, I have these little statuettes about plagues in early Latin America, I'm like, that's not part of our collection scope. I am sorry. But you can also say what you don't take, right? We cannot take big items. We do not have any big exhibit cases, and we have a very tiny storage space. You guys saw the picture of my storage space. We cannot take big items. If something is super bad condition, don't take it unless it's like incredibly rare and important and you have the capacity to take care of that object. I also had to put a thing in my collections policy that we will not take illicit substances, which I'll explain again in a second, but have that collections policy in place. Make it very clear that you're taking things on a donation, deed of gift, not permanent loan. If all of that is in writing, then you can easily turn around and say no, right? You can say, I'm sorry, this doesn't fit our collecting scope, but maybe try this museum, or no, we're not going to take this on permanent loan. Here's our collections policy. Having that in paper helps you a lot. Surprises will happen. Always reach out to experts for help if you need to. So one of the surprises that happened with us was we had 2 doctor's bags that were donated to us full of stuff, and no one had gone through the stuff prior, I'm guessing, because we went through, and as we were cataloging everything, I had this light bulb go on in my head because there was just vials and vials of medicine going, I wonder if any of these things are like bad that I should not have in my possession, especially when one of them had like narcotics like labeled in red over it. So fortunately, I have a great relationship with Clark, who is the person who heads the pharmacy museum downstairs and is an ex-pharmacist. So I wrote a list of all the medicines I had, and I was like, Clark, what do I need to get rid of? And he basically labeled some of the stuff that was like either a hazardous substance or an illegal substance, a controlled substance. And then there were a couple of things that we could not identify. And so we got rid of those as well. In some cases, I got rid of just what was in the bottle and kept the bottle. But in a lot of cases, like I'm not going to open the glass vial to pour out the medicine. So I basically de-accessioned all those objects from our collection and worked with the hazardous waste unit on campus and the university police on campus to dispose of those and have it documented how we dispose of those things. Definitely not what I had on my bingo card when I started working in this museum, was having like level 2 controlled substances that I had to deal with. But other surprises will happen too. Some of the other museums that I've worked with, especially older collections, if you find, for example, bones in your collection and you don't know if those are animal bones or human remains. If you have Native American objects in your collection and you're like, I don't know if this is covered under NAGPRA, just ask. Reach out to the people that you know will know the answer. And in this case, if you ever are like, I don't know who would have the answer, feel free to contact WBAM because we will know some of the places that you can reach out to. My rule of thumb, because I have seen this happen in my own experience, if you find something in your collection that you're like, oh, this could be a really bad PR thing. Oh, I don't want to deal with this. You don't have to announce it to the world that you have the object, but deal with it appropriately, because it is going to be so much worse if down the line it comes out that you had this object and you dealt with it in an inappropriate way, rather than, yes, we had this object, it was from way before any of us were here, and we did X, Y, and Z to handle that object appropriately, especially if it's human remains or Native American stuff. Don't mess around with that. So surprises will happen. Just deal with it in an appropriate way. And if you don't know what that is, reach out to other experts. Don't feel weird about reaching out for help. So to finish out my slides, the status of our process at the Neal Museum, which Elizabeth, you'll be so happy on this progress report. So we have 3 collections to finish and we will be done with our backlog. Now those are kind of bigger collections, but I am hoping that we'll be done by the end of this semester when my graduate assistant graduates. But we are almost done. We've been working since the beginning of last year. So it'll be like a 1.5-year process, but we are almost done. We have a draft of our collections policy in review by leadership. We obtained all but 9 deeds of gift and loan documents. And that of course includes the one where she's passed away and I can't get a hold of her family. And then our next steps beyond finishing up our cataloging is that we want to make our catalogate records mostly public so that people can go onto our website and search through our collection, because that will of course be an educational tool. And also if researchers are interested in any of those objects, they can reach out to us. And then also transferring all of our objects into the proper archival housing, which is like a whole nother big project that will require time and money. A lot of our objects are not in archival boxes or materials. Some of them are still in the eBay boxes that were shipped to us because for some reason they bought things off eBay. Elizabeth's like, so like that's going to be our next step besides finishing out that catalog, is making it public and then going through and assessing what materials I need to then make it a properly housed archival thing. Okay, so any questions that you have, I'm happy to answer those. So being at a university with lots of alumni, sometimes alumni will go to their specific school and say, I want to donate this to the museum. And the development officer will take it and then email me. And I'm like, I have not agreed to take this object. Whoa. I got an email the other day when we were starting the conference and I was like, I'll deal with that when I get back. All right, you have a question. Hold on, let me see if I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I have done work with a local African-American history museum and cultural. It was done back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so
Okay.
all of the collections objects it's a completely unmanaged collection. However, how would you approach it from the community perspective as far as bringing them in to help you identify objects that they know about that you have no clue where they came from or who donated them, or
so bringing community members in to help you identify like the provenance of things?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. So I mean, if you know, do you know specific people that would know it, or is it just kind of like putting the call out?
A little bit of both. I know some specific people, but also there's a wider community that potentially could be of assistance without making it, and also this particular museum is under the auspice of a Parks and Rec department, a city Parks and Rec department, which brings in that bureaucratic element as well, and to prevent the city from developing or further creating rifts with the community, the affected community. I'm just interested in how you would approach that. What would be the best way to, move forward into that invitation to the community?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the politics of like all those things, but I would just reach out and invite. I mean, I've been in the case where I'm a medical museum, but I am not a doctor, not a medical doctor at least. And so I've put pictures of objects on our Facebook and just said, anyone know what this is? Because I don't. And I'm probably going to end up reaching out to certain doctors in those fields and saying, I don't know what this is. Can you enlighten me? So I would, I mean, either put stuff out on social media and say, as like an object highlight, like we have this great object in the collection. We don't know much about it. If anyone has information, please contact us. Or if you wanted to actually bring physically people into the collection, if that's something you would want to do, have an event, invite the community in to see the collection and see if anyone's like, oh, I know what that is, and tells you about it. Obviously you have to work within whatever politics is there, but I would just let people come in, whether it's through virtual or through physical, and share their wealth of knowledge. Yeah. For her? I don't. She muted. You want to just type it? Any other questions? Help you guys. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I have a lot of stuff in our collection that is. Baseball records.
Right.
Early '80s.
Yeah, type.
This is something. That are more important to me to catalog. Do you have any tips on how to deal with organization workers? Like, I don't want to catalog. In our catalog, that doesn't make sense, but it's like 4 minute meeting, like, and some of them are important documents for the organization. How do you manage it? It's like, are they also in catalog? Are they separate? Mostly. Yes. So this is, there's a little bit of a difference how you catalog your question and like catalog your question. So we're doing our cataloging, like, and archive is just like, this is what's in this folder. Right. A large this folder is all the word minutes of this year. Yeah. You know, and I don't know if you can do it as like a larger chunk,
But yeah, I think you could probably do it more as like the archival
and some
approach.
And some of it, financial records for tax purposes, but now they're having a hard time. I haven't revisited this with our board in a while. But
Okay.
Like don't want to. We're also worried about like giving things up. I'm like, well, we really don't need to keep like all financial records from the year 2007. You know, so there's some of that.
But I mean, the other thing too is if it's modern stuff.
Yeah.
You can make the decision of what do we need to keep in for you know, for all those records, or what we need to get rid of.
Yeah, that probably would be the easiest thing for you. And then like if there are things like financial records or sensitive things that you wouldn't necessarily need to keep, like set those, obviously, but or you know, if you have stuff that's got like sensitive personal information, which we do, yeah. So like I have one collection that is some really actual
I'm aware. Yeah.
Yes. That's not easy. And I'm just like, restricted and long that because it's got all this personal information in it. Or like, so like, you know, there will be some things you cannot actually share.
Ed, you had a question?
Yeah, mentioned the deeds.
Yes.
The deeds, we have two major. One was a donation.
Right.
But that was our collection, actually property of the University Foundation.
Right.
Given this status, they say, oh, we don't need that anymore, it's goodbye. So I need to update the deed essentially with the foundation where we discard something, we gotta make sure they know it.
Yeah.
But they're holding the deed.
Okay. That is a tricky one, and technically it's the same for us, because technically Anything that comes into the Regional History Center and I'm using their form as a template for mine is technically a donation to the foundation, technically, but unless it's a huge like monetary gift or a huge like value gift, like your collection would have a large value because it's a huge collection. For me, if I take in one item, I have the deed of gift with me. And if I need to give it to the foundation, that's fine. But typically the small stuff, they don't track it. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Archives, or not following up, but related to. So cataloging is a little bit different for archives.
Yes.
Like what I understand, but what about condition? Because
Oh, that's a good
I'm the
question.
National Heritage area. And so we have sort of a hodgepodge, we have artifacts.
Right.
None of this has been sort of officially processed, but.
Do you know
if
the
there's
answer?
some-
If not, I can ask someone
Yeah,
after, but
Like having resources, I catalog, I mean, our real has a wide variety of things, but we have lots of photographs, paper materials, books, objects, all kinds of stuff. And I pretty much treat all of it the same and catalog it all the same. There's different, in the system catalog that she's talking about, you mark it as like, okay, this is an archival, like, this is an object, and then it changes some of the fields, but there's always a condition field. So yeah, and so then you can put in there, you know, anywhere from poor to excellent, and then you can put all these details and notes and photographs. So I do the same when I get a photograph, I note that there's a freezing, I know there's a yellowing, pictures of all of that. So, I mean, if I was gonna, for like our, board meeting, I'm gonna put all of that as an archive in a box. I'm not going to look at every single piece of paper in that folder, but I might say like, overall, this collection is in good condition. There's no like obvious damage. There's some yellowing, there might be creasing, but like there's no obvious damage. If I'm gonna look at it as like a full collection. Otherwise, I treat everything like individually and like do a condition assessment on every single object. And it doesn't have to be extensive. A lot of times I know that it's like, there's yellowing, there's some creasing, there's soiling on the edges, and then, you know, I have some pictures, and that's about the extent of it. You're welcome. But I'm sure there's specific books and resources on how to do that in archives, but I don't have this off the top of my head. I would look at for the Conservation Center for Art, Historical Artifacts.
yeah.
CCHA. Yeah, that's where I would look for resources. They're excellent.
We do about the same with ours, because we have tons of books, like that's pretty much all we have. It's got books and merit books and stuff, so you pretty much will just take and look at them, get the call, you know,
Why
when
would it
they
not
come
show
in,
it on my screen?
and then just.
Try
pull them from the archive,
maybe
you
it
know
might be
what I
like,
mean?
yeah.
So they're still in our catalog system, but the problem we have.
There we go.
is locations. You know what I mean?
Now, of course, like. So with all these questions, so we chose catalog it for ours, but an interesting conversation I had to have with my higher ups was, well, why can't you use the system that we're already using for the Regional History Center, which is archive space? But that is more specifically to the paper documents, and it doesn't have some of the fields that we would need in each of our things. Like there's no place for pictures in archive space, but you need pictures if you're cataloging your object. And you can see how I did my little sticky notes with the object number
I was curious about that.
there. And that, at least I have something that does it.
Sticking drawings.
About that, because that, you know, you're not state, you don't have, like, I know WD has like archive space, but like, I always want us to integrate our collection with the library system, so it's not circulate, so you are like, you don't want that.
We are separate, yeah. So, and part of it was just because of that logistics thing where we couldn't use archive space. And part of it is that we are separating the Neal Museum collection from the archive collection for management. And so like, we will have this on our website for the museum rather than the Regional History Center's website. So that's obviously a question to have with whoever's above you at Fairmont State. But you'd probably want a system like this to be able to do your cataloging properly.
We have to now
Yeah.
really pick a mess, and I want.
Past Perfect is difficult.
It's difficult. Until I start putting everything.
Yeah.
It's like, you know,
Yep.
like, Kermit the Frog's gum, and then it would be in the publishing section, and then you don't have Kermit the Frog's
Yeah.
gum. So it's a lot of.
So you're also managing an unmanaged collection system.
So I'm. Search option.
Yeah. And technically catalog it, you do have to pay a little extra. Well, you can put things up to their hub if you want like a individual, like, link / branded thing, you have to pay extra, but you can post things online to the catalog it system pretty easily. I know we're past time, so if there's any other questions, let me know. If you want, these records, as an example, feel free to come up and get those. Enjoy the rest of your conference. And you gotta stop recording.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.